So the iPhone 18 Pro leaks are here. September 2026, under display Face ID, a 20 Pro chip on 2 nanometers, variable aperture camera, bigger battery, new colors. On the surface, this looks like Apple doing what Apple does, steady refinement, the annual grind of better. And if you read the coverage, that's exactly how they want you to see it. Cleaner design, faster chip, longer battery, done. But if you have watched this company long enough, something feels different this time, not because of what they're adding, but because of what these additions reveal. I'll explain in a moment. But first, notice what's missing from the conversation. Let's talk about the under-display Face ID first. This is the headline feature. The dynamic island shrinks or disappears entirely. The front of the phone finally looks modern. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Samsung did under-display cameras in 2020. The Galaxy Z Fold 2 had it. Chinese brands like Xiaomi and Oppo have been hiding front cameras for years. The technology wasn't impossible. It wasn't even hard at this point. So why is Apple doing this now in 2026 and not 3 years ago? Here's the uncomfortable answer, because for the first time in a long time, Apple's design language is starting to look dated. Walk into any coffee shop, look at the phones on the tables. Android phones have been all screen for years. Clean, minimal, no cutouts. And meanwhile, iPhone users are still explaining to their friends what the dynamic island is. Normal users don't care about the technical achievement. They just notice that their friend Samsung looks more futuristic than their iPhone. And for a company that built its entire identity on being the premium choice, that's a problem. This isn't innovation. This is catch-up disguised as breakthrough. Now let's talk about the A20 Pro chip. 2 nanometer process, 15% faster, 30% more efficient, impressive numbers on paper, and the tech press will celebrate them. But here's what most people won't connect, and it's a dot worth connecting. 3 years ago, Apple's Silicon LED was embarrassing for competitors. The A14 was so far ahead of Qualcomm that benchmark comparisons felt unfair, like watching a Ferrari race a bicycle. But look at what's happened since. Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, MediaTek Dimensity 9300. The gap hasn't just narrowed, it's become almost irrelevant for normal users. Most people can't tell the difference between an A17 Pro and a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 in daily use. Apps open fast on both, games run smoothly on both. The Apple Silicon advantage that tech enthusiasts obsess over, it's become a talking point, not a user experience. So when you see 15% faster, ask yourself who benefits from that number, not the casual user scrolling Instagram. The people who benefit are the ones who need to justify the premium price tag. The spec sheet warriors, the reviewers who need something to measure. For everyone else, it's just a number, and Apple knows this, which is why they're pivoting hard to something else entirely. Here's where things get really revealing. Variable aperture. The main camera adjusts how much light it lets in. Better low light performance, more depth of field control. Sounds great. Sounds premium. Sounds like Apple pushing photography forward. But here's the detail that tells a different story. Samsung introduced variable aperture on the Galaxy S9. That was 2018, 8 years ago. 8 years, and Apple is just now getting around to it. Let that sink in. For 8 years, Apple acted like variable aperture wasn't necessary. They pushed computational photography instead. You don't need hardware, you need software magic. That was the line. But then something changed. Chinese phone manufacturers started winning camera blind tests. The Pixel kept eating their lunch in still photography. And suddenly, hardware specs started mattering again. This isn't Apple leading. This is Apple admitting that their software-first camera strategy has limits, and they're quietly borrowing from the playbook they dismissed for almost a decade. The variable aperture isn't innovation, it's an admission. The iPhone 18 Pro Max is rumored to have a 5,100 to 5,200 milliamps battery, potentially 40 hours of typical use. And I want you to appreciate what this represents. For years, Apple's narrative around battery was simple. We don't need big batteries because our software is so efficient. You don't need 5,000 milliamps when iOS manages power so well. That was the pitch. Meanwhile, Android phones kept getting bigger batteries. 5,000 milliamps became standard, 5,500 milliamps on some models, and iPhone users kept buying portable chargers. The tech press called Android batteries overkill. Apple fans called them brute force. But normal users, they just noticed their Android friends weren't hunting for outlets by 3 p.m. Now, Apple is doing exactly what they criticized. All right, here's the feature that matters more than any of this, and almost nobody's talking about it, the C2 modem. Apple's in-house cellular chip. This isn't about faster 5G. This isn't about millimeter wave support in more markets. This is about something much bigger. Apple has been trying to escape Qualcomm for years. They've been humiliated in this space. Their first attempt at a custom modem was delayed. The C1 that shipped in some devices was fine, not better, just fine. But the C2 in the Pro models, that's the statement. I mean, this is Apple telling Qualcomm, we're done paying your licensing fees. We're done being dependent on your supply chain. We're taking control. And that's the real story of the iPhone 18 Pro. Not the camera, not the chip speeds, not the under-display Face ID. It's about control. Every feature in this phone, the custom modem, the 2-nanometer chip, the variable aperture, the battery size, they all point to the same thing. Apple is tightening their grip on every component. Less Qualcomm, less Samsung, less dependence on anyone who could become a competitor. The iPhone 18 Pro isn't designed for you to notice. It's designed for Apple to own more of what's inside. One more thing, and this might be the most revealing detail of all, the leaks say the iPhone 18 Pro launch will include Apple's first foldable iPhone. Let me be clear about what this means. For years, Apple dismissed foldables. The narrative was they're fragile, they're gimmicky, the technology isn't ready. Tim Cook was asked about foldables multiple times and gave non-answers that clearly said we're not interested, but Samsung sold tens of millions of foldables. Google made the Pixel Fold. Chinese brands like Honor, Oppo, and Xiaomi dominated the form factor in Asia, and suddenly Apple is making one. What changed? The technology? No, foldable screens have been viable for years. The market? That was proven before Apple even started developing theirs. What changed is Apple's fear that the form factor would mature without them, fear that the iPhone look would become the legacy look, fear that a new generation of users would grow up thinking foldable is normal and rigid screens are old. The foldable iPhone isn't innovation, it's insurance. Now let's talk about what matters for actual buyers. The tech community will obsess over these leaks. They'll debate the 2-nanometer process. They'll analyze the variable aperture. They'll compare benchmark numbers. But normal users, the people who buy phones because their current one is cracked or slow, here's what they'll notice. The screen looks cleaner. That's nice. The battery lasts longer. That's genuinely helpful. The camera is better in low light. Sure. New colors, maybe. That's it. That's the list. The A20 Pro's 15% speed gain. They won't feel it. The under-display Face ID technology, they won't understand it. The C2 modem's significance, they'll never even know it exists. Online, this looks like a major upgrade cycle. In real life, it's the same story as every year, slightly better, slightly faster, slightly different. And that's fine. That's what most people want. They don't need revolution. They need their phone to work. But the gap between what tech enthusiasts celebrate and what normal users experience, that gap has never been wider. So what does the iPhone 18 Pro actually tell us? Not about Apple's products, about Apple's psychology. This is a company playing defense, not because they're losing, they're not. Apple is still the most profitable phone maker on the planet. Their margins are the envy of the industry. But playing offense requires taking risks. It requires moving first. It requires being willing to fail. And Apple hasn't been that company for a long time. The iPhone 18 Pro is what happens when a dominant player realizes the game is shifting around them. Foldables are becoming normal. Camera competitions are being lost. Design language is evolving. And the company that defined premium for a generation is now responding, not leading. Every feature in this phone, from the under display Face ID to the variable aperture to the bigger battery, has appeared elsewhere first. Apple didn't invent any of it. They refined it, polished it, packaged it with better marketing, and that's not nothing. Refinement matters, polish matters, making features work reliably for millions of users matters more than being first. But let's call it what it is. This isn't a breakthrough. This is a company that used to set the pace, learning to keep up. So when September 2026 rolls around and Apple takes the stage to announce the iPhone 18 Pro, and the presentation talks about revolutionary this and game-changing that, ask yourself one question. What fear does this reveal? Because that's the question Apple will never answer on stage. But it's the question that explains everything. The under-display Face ID isn't about cleaner design. It's about not looking outdated next to Android phones. The variable aperture isn't about photography innovation. It's about catching up to camera specs that competitors have had for years. The bigger battery isn't about user experience leadership. It's about admitting that efficiency-only strategies have limits. And the foldable iPhone shipping alongside it, that's the loudest confession of all. Apple isn't scared of losing customers. They're scared of losing the narrative, the story that says Apple leads, everyone else follows. The iPhone 18 Pro is that story being rewritten, not by competitors, by Apple themselves. You probably noticed this pattern forming before I said it. Most people will read these leaks and see progress, but you're not most people. You see the chessboard, and now you see the move. See you next one. Peace out.